Good evening. My name is Tracy. I'm the Education Director at the Whale Museum, so I want to welcome you to tonight's lecture for everyone here in person at the museum and our online audience. Thank you for joining us. For those that are here in person, restrooms are right in the hallway, right when you come through the front door on the other side of the gift shop. And I think Bronte is keeping the gift shop open this evening for everyone. So thank you, Bronte. I want to give a shout out to Dante for being our tech whiz and making the magic of the live streaming happen. Yay! And I also, of course, want to give a shout out to our director, Dr. Mike Cooperberg, who's in the audience. So this is our, sadly, our final lecture in our summer lecture series. But we do have some other plans happening for the fall. So hopefully some of you guys will be able to participate and keep an eye out for upcoming events. We are planning a lecture about pinniped research on October 6th at 6 p.m. And I think the plan is to have it here and also have it live streamed like tonight. Just kind of a standalone lecture, so not part of the series. And then we are working on a fall workshop as well, probably sometime in late November. So again, stay tuned for details about those upcoming things. I want to introduce your awesome presenter tonight. Jeff Foster has spent his whole life around wild and exotic animals. He grew up as the son of a prominent zoo veterinarian, giving him experience caring for and managing animals from an early age. Jeff has worked in the marine mammal field for 50 plus years. He got his start working for SeaWorld and the Seattle Marine Aquarium at the age of 15. He has worked in all facets of the marine mammal field, including capture, animal husbandry, training, rehabilitation, research, and reintroduction. And he has traveled the world helping to conserve and protect wild dolphins and other marine mammals. Jeff has been credited for developing the first successful formula for a neonate cetacean, as well as been instrumental in developing behavior enrichment devices for captive marine mammals. Jeff oversaw the humane captures of oiled sea otters during the Exxon Valdez oil spill. He was director of field operations and research for the Keiko project and oversaw the day-to-day management of the project. He also oversaw the capture, rehab, and successful reintroduction of Springer, the orphaned killer whale. And he was responsible for the Tom and Misha project, the first successful reintroduction of bottlenose dolphins back into the wild. Jeff was instrumental in developing the limpet tags in the study of marine mammals in the wild. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff and give you a big round of applause. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And yeah.
Thank you everybody for coming out tonight. This is what happened. everybody. So Ted Griffin was the fellow that bought Namu. What made Ted unusual was that he actually went swimming with with Namu, and that probably did more for the species at that time than anything that happened before, because here we had these animals that we thought we were terrified of. They were more afraid of than white sharks, and here was somebody in swimming with them, and I guess what I learned from my early days was that these guys are we have a lot to learn about these animals, and that was the thing that for me was why I wanted to continue with this field. But it was also the expansion days, and so all the aquariums around the world wanted these animals, and so most of them came from this area. They either came from here or from Victoria over in just across the way in Canada. And the captured people were Don Goldsberry, and SeaWorld bought those permits out, and then Bob Wright over in Victoria. So there was a huge demand for these animals, and people were fascinated that you could have this giant animal and be able to interact with it and not get eaten. But that also was bad for this population here, our local population, killer whales. We didn't know very much about these animals at the time. We didn't know that there was a difference between resident animals and transient animals. We didn't know very much about them. We thought they were much more dynamic in how they move through their pods, and but the only way to learn that is by tagging these animals. And so, but we had an agreement with the University of Washington for any of the animals that we didn't use for public display, we would tag and release. And so the lower picture there is Dr. Al Erickson and Brad Hansen in the orange hat. We were putting the first tags on, and at the time we didn't know that these animals were transient animals. And when we first brought these animals in, they didn't eat. She didn't eat for a number of days, months. And we separated the female from the male and brought them up to Kanaka Bay over on the west side of San Juan Island, where we put the female and held her in an indented pen as we were going through the court cases. And as soon as we separated the two, the male started eating right away. And he was a larger animal. He was 15 feet, 11 3/4 inches. Our cutoff size was 16 feet. But so this animal was legal. And eventually we lost the court case, which was a very good thing. And so we moved the male up to Kanaka Bay with the female. So we put them in, and they were very excited to see each other. And we started throwing fish, right away, because we thought since the male would eat, maybe he could train the female to eat as well. And so the male went after the fish, and the female just kicked the snot out of him, and he never touched another fish. Well, it was interesting, after we released these animals, they went out to Smith Island, and they started eating marine mammals pretty much right away. And so I've been involved with a lot of rescue efforts. I don't know how to do one at a time, which would be softer touch. I've been dealing with a lot of rescue projects all over the world, and this is one of a big one that stands out is the Exxon Valdez oil spill. And that was, again, it was something that, we wanted to help, because these animals were, hundreds of otters were getting covered in oil, and they're freezing to death. Their coats are so thick with hair that if they get, oil on, or, the crude oil on their fur, that's, they can't survive. So we had hundreds of animals that we caught, and we were able to successfully, we never lost an animal in any of the captures. Maybe I could do this differently. I wonder if I can. Probably not. Okay, so we take these, we take the animals, clean them up with from their oil, and then eventually we would release them back in the wild. But it was difficult to find spots where it hadn't been impacted by the oil. So one of the jobs that we had to do was, I oversaw the captures of the animals and the handling of the animals, but then we also had to figure out a place to put them when they were clean, because we had 100 plus animals that needed to be released. And so that was a very busy summer that summer. But these guys are such, I don't know why it's doing this, but these guys are, they're really sweet. They're wonderful little animals, but they have a bad attitude, and boy, can they bite. And And we'd take these animals and in the last picture, I don't know if you saw the helicopter, we'd put them into kennels and dog kennels, and then load them up into the helicopter. Then they'd fly them back into Seward, where they treated the animals and then held them in pools there. Well, we had these animals. We had an otter we had 2 male otters, which were the largest ones that had ever been caught at that time. They were 106 pounds apiece. They were beautiful white animals and huge. And so we got them into the kennels and we brought them up to the helicopter and loaded them up in the helicopter, and they were starting to take off, and they just were a little bit off the ground, and they came back down really hard and jumped out of the helicopter as fast as they could, because one of the otters had just kind of flexed and popped all the buttons on the kennel, and just terrified the helicopter pilots, because what do you do with a 106-pound otter, sitting in your trying to drive the helicopter? But they were amazing animals. And the other thing that was interesting with this is learned on this project was that there's transmission of disease can go from humans to otters. At least we thought so. So some of the animals we caught, we found that they had herpes virus lesions on the inside of their mouth. So there was a real concern about those animals being put back in the wild, because these are captive animals, but likely that was developed from stress of being in a captive situation. And it turned out that it was something that couldn't be passed to people. But in some cases it still does. And these guys are cute little sorry guys, I wish I could do it, but I'm just click on it. Then, so from there, we'll go to Point Defiance. That was another interesting chapter in my life. Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, I'd been working in the captive industry for a long time at that point. But I was getting disillusioned, and because I just felt like we weren't learning as much about these animals as we could. And that's the whole thing that I learned in the captive industry was that we don't know much about these animals. People think we see these animals as terrifying animals or stupid or something like that, and they're not. And they are, these certain, especially social animals like walrus and whales and dolphins, chimpanzees, gorillas, are a lot more like us than people give us credit for. And the captive industry would always push and say, you can't anthropomorphize these animals, but it's easy to do. If you have a dog, you realize how connected you are to those animals. Well, when you're lucky enough to work with these animals, you develop a relationship like you do with your dog, and even probably more so because you're spending 8 hours a day with these animals, 5 days a week, and it just wants to go 2 each time I do it. I'm sorry, guys. So let's try to say, and so at Point Defiance Zoo and Aquarium, one of the things we were trying to work on was trying to get a breeding program going with the beluga whales. So we did some of the first ultrasounds with beluga whales with cetaceans that had never been done. And it was really fascinating to watch how the animals responded to the ultrasound. And none of the stuff had been tried before, so you're kind of trial and error. And so we used an ultrasound and put it up. We'd have Mayak lay out like the picture on the right hand side there, and then we used the ultrasound and we could check and see if the fetus was there. But as soon as you turn on the ultrasound, Mac would respond, because it was at a frequency that was made her a little get but she trusted us, and she eventually got used to it. And so that was a wonderful experience, because I got to get up close and personal and know some of these animals, and that for me was to try different things to see if I can make this work. Well, maybe. And the other things we did was we developed first formulas of almost. We developed formulas for harbor porpoise and cetaceans, and so we started with raising these harbor porpoise, and I'm sorry, this has got to be annoying. But these little harbor porpoises the size of a football, they're teeny little guys, and they're so fun to take care of. But they're a high-strung animal, a lot like a hummingbird, and short-lived. So, but we raised a couple of them, and they did pretty well the first time that had been done. And so we developed formulas for some of these animals, and really what we were kind of looking for is formulas for these animals in captivity when Mammals orphans a calf or whatever, but also for if we had to rehab some of these animals and try to get them, rehab them, get them back out there. At least we thought we could do that, especially with cetaceans, at that time, because we thought they were more dynamic than they are. And then we had E.T., and E.T. was a walrus. It was an interesting walrus. E.T., I'll give you this is a kind of a tape here. E.T. was about 2,500 pounds, about 12 feet long, and he was considered a dangerous animal. He'd been hand raised, and but then he was going through his teenage years, and he would get rambunctious. And what they do at the time was that if they had a stranded animal, they just toss it in the pool with the walrus. And so they had harbor seals and fur seals and sea lions and California sea lions all in the pool together, and so there's a lot of movement in there, and he was in it. That's T. And so he just ended up killing some of the animals in there because it was too crowded of an exhibit, for one thing. And I was taking care of an animal that was called Georgie Girl, who was a female walrus who had been swallowed a ball and had to have major surgery, and they were concerned that they were going to lose her. And so I was taking care of her, and E.T. kept coming and banging on the door. And finally I let him in, and he came into the back and just really fast put up a wall of water. And he's much bigger than I am when he stood up. And he tilted his head one way and tilted the other. Then he just went into a submissive posture, and I started working with him. And he was just really bored. And just because he wanted something to do, and so we started training him. And we were able to train him to, what I was doing with the harmonica was teach him to blow. And so you could hear the sound with the harmonica. That's what I think he was doing it there at one point. And so when he hears that, then we say, okay, good. And then we can teach him to whistle once he knows how to blow. And then we'd work on things like, just building trust. And within about 6 weeks after I started working with him, this was considered a dangerous animal that if you got into the exhibit with him, you got out. We had him, a school group of blind kids, there were 6 of them, that came in and laid E.T. out so they could feel what a walrus felt like. And so that was, you could trust him to that point. He was so smart that I think you could teach him to go out and get you coffees. He was a wonderful animal. And that was just another reinforcement that these animals are super intelligent, especially these social animals. Okay, let's try it again. And then another animal that's pretty well known is Keiko the killer whale. I got involved with Keiko just because at that point in my life, I was kind of done with the captive industry. I felt like the captive industry at that point was preaching the same tune. They were saying, it's all about education, research, and entertainment, and conservation. But in reality, it was really just about making the money. And I was all about trying to learn more about these animals. That's why I started in the captive side of it, because I wanted to learn more. At that time, we didn't really have, whale researchers worked at the whaling stations taking samples. We didn't have very few whale researchers at all. And during the last captures in the Puget Sound, that was Ken Balcomb's. I remember him coming out to the pen when we had him down in Butt Inlet, and that was his very first day at work. He was working with Michael Biggs, and he started his photo ID work, from there. So this goes back a long ways, a lot of it. But so I was disillusioned, so I thought, we have an opportunity to be able to try to take an animal and try to put it back in the ocean. Now, it seems like that should be a pretty simple thing, because they're social animals, and that it's never been done before. We're going to give it a try. Let's see if we can do it. Well, we had a benefactor, Craig McCaw, who was outstanding, and he was very supportive of the effort, and his wife, Winnie McCaw. And it turns out that was part of the agreement in their divorce proceedings that Craig and Winnie McCaw divorced, and Craig had to take care of the whale. And Craig wasn't initially, connected very much, but once he got to know Keiko, the more and more he realized, that this was a really cool project, and he wanted to be part of it. And so it was fun to get Keiko ready for the move. And this is a little video of kind of just kind of an overall view of the Keiko stuff. And everybody knows about the movie Free Willy, or at least a lot of people do, or 30 or or older. And it was a movie that wasn't a real movie, but it resonated with people, and they wanted to do something to help. And so it was so when it went into release into VHF, they put a little logo on the back saying, support the Free Willy and the cause to Free Willy. And so the Free Willy Keiko Foundation was formed, and money started coming in. Craig McCaw got on board, and they made it a reality. And they'd been in Newport, or he'd been in Newport for a couple of years at that point. The staff that was working with him was happy with him, just keeping him there. And the town didn't really want Keiko to go, and especially the aquarium itself, because they knew that if Keiko left, that they'd be losing a lot of revenue. And so they didn't want to see that animal go. But we'd committed to take him to Iceland and to find a home for him and to try. And so we trained him. We did live fish training. We prepared him the best we could. We did a lot of exercise behaviors, a lot of mental stuff that he had that we'd have to work through, just to get him thinking about stuff. This is it. We flew him on a C-17 from Newport, Oregon, directly to Vestmannaeyjar, Iceland. It's a little island off the south end of Iceland. And it was an amazing flight. But right here, you can watch when it lands. We had 40-mile-an-hour winds, and was our cutoff. And we had 42-mile-an-hour winds. And so so they decided to go in. And when we did, we came down and we hit with one wheel and put the other one down, and then smoke filled up the cabin, and we had to get off immediately evacuate the plane. And so so everybody got off except for myself, the veterinarian, and one other trainer. And and Keiko wasn't breathing. He just kind of stopped. He wasn't breathing, and we were really concerned that he might have not made it. But then after about 20 minutes, and I knew that he, could see a little bit of vibration, like from his heartbeat. I was in the cradle with him with the water, and the rest were up above, standing on the side of the box, and I thought I could see something. And then eventually he took up his breath. About 20 minutes into it, and before that he'd only been able to hold his breath for about 10 minutes. So he doubled his record. So this is some of the preparation to get him ready for the wild. Initially it was just getting him into that environment, which was just a really difficult environment. We had in the first year and a half, we had 150 hurricane force storms, and with winds of excess of 200 miles an hour on the south end of the island. And so, the winters are rough there, but the summers aren't much better. And to take him out, the only time we could take him out was in the summertime, because it was just too dark, too rough. And we were fortunate enough to be able to, from the research we were doing in conjunction while we were doing the training with Keiko, to find that in summer months, the Icelandic killer whales would come to the outer islands there, and the herring would spawn in that area, and the whales came in and followed the herring. These images here of with Keiko interacting with some of the wild whales. He was an animal that was caught between two places. He knew people, but then these other animals look like him, and he hadn't been with another killer whale for a lot of years, and so he didn't know. And so we were hoping that he'd swim off with one of the killer whales families. There was multiple families around, but he never did, until right here at the end. And when typically what would happen, he would go out, we'd go neutral with the boat, and then he'd have a chance to listen, and then gradually we'd get him closer and closer to those whales, and then go neutral, and then have him interact. And he had probably close to 100 encounters, probably pretty close, but none of them, most of them close enough to be physical, but they never lasted more than a minute and a half. So that was discouraging. And eventually, Keiko ended up swimming. We lost him in a storm, and he swam to Norway. And I think it was, we kind of predicted that was going to happen, because Keiko didn't know, he didn't have the skills, didn't have the social skills, the hunting skills, the navigational skills that he would need in the wild. And the only way that he was going to be able to survive was if he was going to if he was going to be able to integrate into a group, and that just never really happened. So so then he ended up in Norway, and he was there for about 1.5 years, and then he passed away, and this is his grave. But what we learned from the Keiko project was that's where we started developing tags and working with tags for marine mammals. We started doing some suction cup work with we'd been doing it and funded a lot of suction cup work through the Keiko project, and that was some of the first time we were getting some dive data. So how deep are they diving? How fast are they swimming? How long are they staying down? Where are they going? These kind of things. And so for me, I kind of went into more of the research side. Now this is a pretty big animal. This was on a project we were doing down in the Channel Islands, down in California. The animals in the front are subadult males, and this guy in the back has a dorsal fin that's probably close to 8 feet tall. He is, I've seen thousands of killer whales in the wild, and in Iceland, and Norway, and all over the world, and I've never thought there was a hurt in the books that there's a 30-foot killer whale, but this was one. So that was it was fun to be able to see animals like that. But also from the Keiko project, so it was again using suction cup tagging, and then trying to continue to work with our tags to be able to get this baseline information on multiple species that have never been really studied. So we started with suction cup tags, and you can see on the male that's breaching there, you can see on his flank there that he has a tag on. And so we basically get the information on just how deep are they diving, where are they going out, and how long are they staying down. And the suction cup tags would last, the longest one we had down was 70 hours in Norway. But about 24 hours, would be a long time in the Puget Sound. And so we get a little bit of data, but it gave us something to go with, or go by. And then the added bonus was that we could take skin samples from the suction cup. So then that way we didn't have to biopsy the animals anymore, which was a nice thing. And so some of these little tools, are kind of multi-purpose tools, and they work pretty good. Oops, let's try that one again. Okay, this is a video. I'm not sure how to start it, but we'll try. Well, you know what? Maybe we'll just skip this one. Oh, no, here we go. Let's skip this one. So when I talk about multi-species, so we started working with these tags and developing more and more, and they started with suction cup tags. And the first one we put on Keiko was the size of a dinner plate, just about. But they've gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. And you can see some of the one in the middle is a sperm whale. You can see all the jewelry hanging off of him. He has a suction cup tag, a TDR on the back, a satellite tag on the side, and another dive data tag, a D tag on the front. And this was Mango. We got to know him pretty well, and he would tolerate us putting tags on for a while. And then he'd get kind of, every year we'd try to put a tag on him, and every year we'd find him, and he just kind of tolerated. But we got some fascinating information, and this information, unfortunately, I can show you this next one. So we'd been using, up to this point, we'd been using poles mostly, and then we started using crossbows and then air guns to be able to get, that we use for biopsy samples, and to modify that to be able to place our tags with an air gun. And so again, this is, we try to do this as non-invasive as possible. And one of the things that we found was that especially if we were biopsying, if we biopsied an animal and got a biopsy, hit the animal and bounced off of it, the animal would flinch a little bit, but that'd be about it. But if we dropped the arrow next to the animal in the water, they didn't like that at all. They'd a noticeable jerk. But so it was interesting to see how these patterns for these animals, it kind of changed with with each species, and you had to kind of understand each species to be able to work with them and get any information. And these are Cuvier's beaked whales, and these are super hard to be able to tag and study. They dive for 3 hours and dive down to about almost 3 hours, and then dive down to 3,000 meters. And we had no idea. When we first got our tags back, we thought they were broken. and because it just did not make sense that an animal could dive that deep and stay down so long and only come up for just a few breaths and start all over again. So you can see how the satellite tags went on the B12s, and they had a little stronger reaction than a killer whale does because they're just a little bit smaller animal. So again, it was just all about trying to learn as much as we could because, as I say, we're trying to catch up with the research that the terrestrial scientists have been doing. They've been doing it for years. But with the marine scientists, especially the marine mammal scientists, it was really pretty much samples up until 1970, 75, and then the research on the behavioral side of it, and more a broader understanding of these animals. Then we started realizing that another way to be able to try to get some information from these animals is by using auger plates and getting respiratory samples. And from the respiratory samples, it can tell us a tremendous amount of information. And so this technology, when you first start with it, it goes very slowly. But then what comes out of it, you just never know. And there's so many different directions you can go with this information that you've gained. And learning about these species, and again, spending time with them is really the key. And then this is another kind of interesting project. This was a Pacific right whale. This was Pacific right whales one of the rarest whales in the world. You've probably never even heard of them. They thought they were extinct before we went out looking for them. And they thought if there might have been only just a couple of them around. So the National Marine Fisheries funded a project to go see if we could tag one, see if we could find one first, and then if we could find one, put a tag on it. So we said, okay, how can we do this? And so we came up with a way of flying in a plane and then dropping these sonar buoys out of the plane, and then in a large area. And so basically what these are is hydrophones listening for the whales. And so we put these out in a large area, and eventually we started hearing sounds. And then once we heard what we believed was a vocalization of a Pacific right whale, then we'd go out there and kind of circle it and then try to triangulate on it and then gradually eventually get in. And we were able to find them. And these were the first ones. They hadn't seen them in years. And so they didn't know if they were extinct or not. And we were able to actually prove that they were, and we were actually able to get a tag on. And so they think there's about 50 of them left. Again, they go from here pretty much all the way to Russia, and there's just a handful of them. So when especially species like that, when there's just a handful of them, to be able to understand them if we want to keep them around, the only way we're going to keep them around is by understanding them, I guess. And then another project that you're probably familiar with if you've been working here at the Well Museum and had to listen to the video 1,000 times is Springer, A73. And Springer was a little animal that was a northern resident killer whale that was out of habitat and was seen down off Vashon Island. And she was a little animal that she was by herself, and she just some of the southern residents would come by, and she never really paid much attention, and then when we identified who she was and where she came from, and we watched her for a number of months before we intervened, and we could just see her health going down, and we could we watched her off off Seattle. She started interacting with the ferries and boats, and there's some real concern that she was going to get chopped up by the boat when it went by, the ferry boat leaving Vashon, or that she was going to be hit by one of the boaters in the area. She was a sweet little animal, and and so we were tasked to see if we could do something, see if we could bring her in, rehab her, get her back on her fluke again, and send her out the door. And so what we did was with Springer was we noticed that she had a favorite stick. And we said, okay, well, the last 3 times we've been out here, she's had that stick. Let's take that stick away from her, give her another stick. But for some reason, she likes that stick. And so we took the stick away. And then when we came back the next day, we tied a line to that stick when we saw her and threw the stick out there. Well, she saw there was her stick. Her stick is back. So she started rubbing on her stick. Well, eventually we pulled it in closer and closer and closer. And And as and then we get her up next to the boat, and now we have the stick in our hands, and now we're starting to rub her with the stick, and now she's swimming by, and she's doing the swim pattern where she'd come by the boat, and you know, we could rub her with her stick. By doing that, we were able to get bloods from her dorsal fin, you know, drawn from a free swimming wild whale. So then it gave us some guidelines on what we're dealing with. And we knew that, you know, that she had ketosis very badly, which is usually a sign that the animal is starving to death or losing weight quickly. And so we knew at that point that we had to do something. So we were told that, you know, okay, go ahead, you can catch her up. We'll move her to this place called Manchester. And Manchester is over on just across from Seattle, over on the Bremerton side, or Bainbridge side, and that was, you know, we held her there for about a month, got her put on a lot of weight. We had these remote feeder tubes and everything because we didn't want to associate the food with people, and we just stayed away from the pen as much as we could, but sent the fish down, and she got so she knew when the fish were coming down. You know, we had always water going down, and so it was running all the time, but she'd hear the the fish hit the side of the tube as it was going down, and so that was kind of like a dinner bell, you know. So she got very effective at catching them. Well, Springer was found down in Lower Puget Sound, and then we had to bring her up to Johnstone Strait. So that was a long move, and the only way really to do that was by using a high-speed catamaran. And so we used a high-speed catamaran that was that we loaded up. We got it from Nicholson Brothers on Whidbey Island. They donated it to us, and we were able to put her in once we determined that she was healthy and that she wasn't going to transmit any diseases to the wild population, that we loaded her up in the back of the boat, and we were able to get up to Johnstone Strait very quickly and put her in a put her in a pen. And this slide is a little out of order. So we put her in this little sea pen down in down up in Johnstone Strait, and the next day she starts jumping, and just the very next day she's jumping, and we got there late in the afternoon, and she starts jumping and seemed really exciting. And sure enough, there was a pot of whales coming in, and so we said, okay, well, here's our opportunity. It wasn't her family, but it was her grandmother's family. So we opened the gate and let her out, and she swam right out to him, and then just kept going. And she went one way, and the family went the other. Grandma's family pod went the other direction. And we thought, okay, well, now she's out there, and maybe she'll find her mom. And so we monitored her for a few days, and she was coming up to sailboats and interacting with sailboats and everything. And we were concerned, but we were watching from afar just to see, what was going on. Well, eventually, she hooked up with her aunt's pod, and she hooked up with them and started traveling with her aunt's pod. And when she broke away from her aunt's pod to go to a boat, the female, the aunt, would come and whack her with her tail fluke or something. It'd be aggressive towards her. So she ended up stopping that completely, that behavior, and interacting with the boats. And now I think she's on her third calf, and she integrated into her grandma's group very well, and she is, she's still out there and doing really well. So these are some of these projects. You never know how they're going to go. You have to give them a try, and some go well, some don't. But every time we do it, we learn something new. Then we went from that project to another one. This is Back to the Blue project. This is in Turkey. These animals were two bottlenose dolphins who were kept in this hotel swimming pool up on top of a mountain, and they were in very bad shape. There was no filtration system on the pools. There was a group called Dolphin Angels that petitioned to try to do something about this this situation, and so they raised some funding, and they got Born Free out of the UK behind them, and they brought us in to try to do something with these animals, see if we could release them back to the wild. So this is Tom and Misha. Since we're running a little bit late, I won't do the video on this one. I've been having problems with it anyhow. But Tom and Misha were one would have been in captivity for about 7 years, the other about 14, I believe. And so they'd been in captivity for long periods of time. And one of the things we found with Keiko was that Keiko didn't recognize fresh live fish as a food source. He didn't understand it. And these guys didn't really either. You could put live fish in there and they just watch it go. So we had to teach them to eat live fish. So you start with, what you do is you start with kind of fresh fish, because that's a different taste than frozen fish. And then you eventually give them stun fish, or dead fish first, and then stun fish, and eventually live fish. And once they start eating live fish, then they can, that opens up a whole new opportunity. And so once these guys were doing really well at eating live fish, we did all the blood works to make sure that there was no known pathogens that would go to the wild population. That's always our fear, is cross-contamination with the wild species. And so, but they checked out all right, and we were able to put the tags on these animals, both the satellite tag and the VHF tag, and then we opened the gates and let them out. And Tom and Misha were both really different from each other. Tom was an animal that really liked people, liked to interact with people, liked to play with people, just like your favorite dog. Misha was always the animal that always looked out to sea. He was always just kind of looking out and just watching what was going on, and it just seemed much wilder. And once we released them, they took off and they traveled together, and they went up to Greece. They got up to an island just inside Greece, and then they separated and went opposite directions, and about 300 miles apart or more. And Tom went to a beach in Turkey. There's lots of people on the beach, and the people in Turkey like to throw bread out to the fish. So you got these really fat, really dumb fish that no normal dolphin would ever want to go in there and eat. But for Tom, he loved it. He went in there and he'd go in and he'd like to interact with the people, because he loved to, give rides and play with them and everything, and then go eat and then come back and play with people. And so we were watching it and we're going, oh, this isn't a good thing. And especially when the fishermen are saying, okay, they're destroying my nets, he's taking fish out of my nets, and the commercial guys are coming in here soon, and they will shoot Tom. So he said, okay, well, we'll catch him up, and we'll move him back down to where Misha is. So we caught him up and moved him all the way down where Misha was. We replaced the satellite tag on Tom at that time, and Misha, his tag was starting to go dead at that point. And we got him down there, got him out to where we could see where the two animals were, because Misha's tag was still chirping at that point for a little bit. And you can see them come together, and then immediately Tom just split and they went other directions. So these animals have been housed together for years and years and years, in this really tight situation up on the mountainside in horrific conditions, and yet they're not bonded close enough that they would stay together for the rest of their life. And so, you tolerate sometimes, I guess, if you're in a really small room with people for extended period of time in a jail cell, basically, and I'm sure at some point you just don't want to ever see him again. And that's kind of how it was. But the cool thing with Tom was that Tom would every year come back and interact with people on the beach. And so, and it did it less and less and less and less and less. But it was really good for the people, because the people could interact with this animal, have this experience to be able to have this animal out of the wild come up and interact with them and just love it. And Tom loved it too. And so it was kind of it was a good relationship in that situation. And that lasted until he finally disappeared. So, and another one you guys probably know is Toki and Tokite. And Toki was an animal that was the last southern resident in captivity. We worked with the Lummi tribe to try to bring Toki home. And so there was a huge effort for many, many, many years to try to bring Toki home. But we finally got traction when we got the tribe involved. And the tribe has a very strong voice, and they have a very strong spirit and a belief in these animals as being their direct relatives. And so we wanted to help as much as we could, because it was a worthwhile project with an animal in the smallest tank in captivity. She was in this tank that was just terrible, and it was the original tank in Miami. It hadn't been changed in 50 years. At this point, we were able to get in because they condemned the tank because it was too dangerous for the people to come up stay in the stands. And so they shut it down. So we had this animal that was a star for 50 years. You know, I mean, it was like a rock star. And generations had come in to see this animal perform. And then all of a sudden, one day, they were gone. And so when I got there, it was one of the saddest things I had ever seen. She was stuck in the corner, her head in the corner, and she was biting like an autistic child. And she didn't swim more than 500 feet at most in a day. It was really depressing. And it was, you know, for an animal like this that was such a, I don't know, like Michael Jackson almost, his stature, and then to see her just kind of in the situation. And this is a little bit of this behavior. She goes back and forth. She's because she's a little distracted because I'm there, and so she's raising her head up out of the water. But when I sat up in the stand, she'd just sit there and just rock back and forth, you know. And you know, so we started working with her. And she started responding really well. And she, you know, this was an animal that had been worked with all her life. She had performed to millions and millions of people. Now so she was in this languishing situation for a long time. Then we started working with her, started doing enrichment with her, we started getting in the water with her. They've stopped swimming with these animals because of a lawsuit against SeaWorld. And we were able to get in the water, which is one of the most stimulating things for these animals. And you can see this is a teeny little pool, and how she can go faster than this too. And it was amazing that this animal had survived that long in this little tiny pool with just in a really crappy situation. And so we tried everything we could to get her home. We had a place on Cypress Island that the governor had, and the governor said that we could use, and DNR said that we could use over in Cypress where the old fish pens were, and because it was kind of the ideal spot, and it was the ideal spot because it was kind of on the backside of Cypress, so the southern residents typically didn't go that way, so there was kind of an acoustical barrier there, as well as it was you know, good water, good clean water, and we had a nice space, and it was very protected, and we didn't have houses around. And we looked at a number of different sites around the San Juans and then Canadian San Juans, and we just never could find a site that people were saying, okay, this is, you know, you can come over here and use this, And so we ended up, you know, it was just a sad situation because we had the funding and everything to be able to make it happen, and she just wasn't strong enough to make it. Another project that was kind of an interesting one is the whale jail. This is in Russia. Russia was catching animals for the Chinese, and when we got contacted, there was 88 beluga whales and 10 killer whales that were caught, and they'd been wintered over from the fall before, and so they were in really bad shape and in a really bad situation. So we got support from Jane Goodall and Leonardo DiCaprio, and Jean-Michel Cousteau, and we put together a small team and went over and talked to Putin and the Russian ministers that could try to stop this. And this is you can see it's a pretty small team. There was just a couple others besides Jean-Michel and Charles Vinnick and Katie, my wife, and Harry and David, and you can see my wife down in the left-hand corner there. She's 8 months pregnant with that one right over there, and so it was really hard conditions. We were not wanted there because this was, we don't know for sure, but we thought that it was a Russian mafia operation. There was over $100 million worth of animals there, and they were in a really crappy situation. During the winter, it freezes up. They got frostbite, you can see on some of the animals there. They had to continually break the ice to get them so they could breathe. We have no idea how many animals they lost over the winter, but it was probably a significant number. And you can see this is each one of these pens had about a dozen animals in there, and you'd only see 6 or 8 of them at a time at the surface. But there was no room for them really to swim. They just sink down and play on the bottom, and they try to blow through the net to pick up shells on the bottom, but they couldn't do that very easily, but they'd work at it, and because there was a net on the bottom, and it was suspended. But these animals were, they were eating well. That was a good thing, but there was, almost 100 of them, and with 10 killer whales, and so we were able to talk to Putin and the ministers, and we told them about the situation with Tom and Misha, and said, this is what happened with Tom, because they were concerned about that too. What happens when you release these animals? What happens if we did that? And I told them, and so I think that they saw the benefit of trying to return them, and so they agreed to do that. And so the first whales that left the whale jail were the killer whales, and they were able to tag those, and then put them in large ships, and then bring them back up into the Chukchi Sea, and release the killer whales. The beluga whales, because they got a late start, they couldn't the tags. They couldn't use the tags that we wanted to provide for them because they weren't allowed to. So they had to come up with their own tags, which were much bigger. But they did tag some of the animals, and they did find them the next year, and they had integrated some of them. Had integrated into the pods. So that was very successful. The beluga whales some of them were released up north, but some were released just right from where they were held, which is in eastern Russia, and some of them swam up and down the coast, but eventually they either disappeared or moved north. Now, this is the last one I was on. This is Hope the humpback whale. This is over in Germany. This was just a couple months ago. This is a humpback whale that was stranded, and had been stranded for over a month. And it was in a really shallow area. It's right in the back of the Baltic Sea. And so it was just the worst place you could possibly be. And it was right in a very freshwater area of the Baltic. And so she was, she'd stranded a couple times. They tried to release her, but the water was so shallow around there that I don't think she was able to navigate very well. And I think that was why she kept restranding. But we thought, okay, she seems like, let's go take a look and see, what kind of shape she's in. And they dug a kind of a pan out where she could lay in that pan. And so she was suspended a little bit in the water, but she couldn't turn around, couldn't move. And so we said, okay, well, if we dig this trench out to the channel, because it was a narrow channel, but it went on for miles, and then if we could get the barge in there and load her up into a barge and get up the channel and see what we could do. So the first thing was to get in there and get a feel for the animal. This is on one of the first interactions. We didn't have, initially they were very cautious about us getting close to the animals, and because they're big. This animal is about 42 feet, and they can, with a pectoral fin or a tail fluke, they can do some serious damage. We got out there, and she had this green algae all over it, and it was because she'd been in fresh water too long, and she hadn't been moving very long. So she had this sloughing skin that you put your hand underneath it, and it was like a putty knife. You just peel the stuff off in layers that were 2 inches thick. Well, this is about the second or third day, and we're starting to work our way down the body, and I was going underneath her pectoral fin, and she starts to respond, and she hadn't been moving those pecs. So then I got her in the armpit and started working her armpit, and she started moving her pecs, which we wanted her to do because she hadn't been moving those pecs. And the key to survival is if you can't be stiff when you're released, because you have to be able to survive out in that environment. And so that was encouraging. Oops. So that was encouraging, and so we were able to dig that trench out, and then we were able to barely turn her around, but she trusted us to be able to do that. And she got to the point where I'd be trying to take bloods from her, and we're standing in a little shallow water, and she's in the pan, and so I'm still looking at her upper dorsal fin like this to try to get the bloods, and I'm just right at the edge of her pec, and she's going up and down with my leg, with her pectoral fin, trying to interact with me, trying to get rubbed, and she was just, I'd interacted with smaller animals, killer whales mostly, and dolphins, a lot of dolphins and things, and beluga whales, but never with a humpback. You rarely have a chance. I've done a lot of disentanglement work and swam with them a lot, but I've never got to know one. And this one was a really special animal. And you knew that she knew that we were trying to help her. And so that was something that was really neat to see, to build that trust, to build it so quickly. Within just a matter of a few days, we were able to get our hands into her mouth, pop her jaw, put a tube in there, and get some fluids into her. And then once we get some fluids into her, it wasn't a lot, but we were able to get some in there. That kind of gave her a little bit of a spark. And I think it also gave her a bit of a spark once we started getting some of that itchy skin off of her or anything. It just gave her just a will to live. So we got her into the barge, we turned her around and got her, so we got her, positioned her in a way and kind of worked her close to the barge, and then she swam right into it. And it was perfect. And so we got the boats and started heading north and heading up towards Norway. So this is a really big barge. It's about 100 feet long. This is just our tender boat. It was a tugboat there. And we thought that she could maybe potentially turn around. Those white bags you can see in the barge there were, these sandbags were about 4 feet by 4 feet. And that was to keep this tarp down inside there. But she could only turn so much. She was just a little too big to make that turn. So we did everything we could to try to get, to figure out the best way to get her out of there. But we also wanted to go as far as we could up in north, up by Norway, off the coast of Norway, and out of the Baltic Sea. So when we go in there and start interacting with the whale, she liked it. She liked to be rubbed around her mouth. She liked to be rubbed around her nose. She liked to be looked in the eye. And here, this is the kind of interesting. Then we'd get out, and when we get out, she'd moan, and she'd moan, and she'd moan. That yellow strap is just that she's just resting on that. It gave her a way to be able to rest on it, her chin. She was telling us she wasn't happy. So anyway, so she traveled more than, I think it was over 300 miles, almost 400 miles that we got out of the Baltic Sea. We were able to, she was released, and then she ended up starting to swim back towards the Baltic. And we put a tag on her just because we want to see what happens. You want to confirm these things. That's why it's so important to use that tag, because you can spend a lot of money and not find out what the results are. But because you want to know what's going to happen to these animals, because we invest a lot of time, a lot of motion in these animals. You want to make sure they're taken care of. So these are the satellite hits. We got about, I think, 30 hits dive depths, and her deepest dive was to 150 meters. So it probably looks like she was diving down to depth to feed in. And she traveled 150 miles in the first couple days. And then on day 6, the tag stopped working. And it was, unfortunately the animal did wash up. But with this project, it's been so crazy. It was funded by a billionaire and a millionaire. And they have gotten that, now they're fighting amongst themselves. There's been a lot of just hard feelings, I guess, about the project. And it's unfortunate because we learned so much from this whale. It was such a really good whale, but there's been a lot of conspiracy theories that go along with this whale. One of them, which is maybe possible, is that the Danish military was out blowing up mines. And we have videos of them doing it. And at the same day, the tag stopped working in the same area that they stopped working within just a few miles. It was, 5-6 miles. And maybe even closer, we just don't know. So there's so many unanswered questions about this whale, but it was one that, was such a special animal, and it's unfortunate that it had to end the way it did. But that was just a couple months ago.
I just wanted to give you a time check. So it's 8:02. We want to leave some time for questions too.
3 minutes. So the last thing is well sanctuaries. And this is the projects we've been working on now. And this is to try to take some of these animals in captivity that are older animals that aren't working, to try to provide them a better home. This is 100 acres up in Nova Scotia. And this is a really large area that we can take some of these animals that have been performing for most of their lives and put them in a surroundings that is more natural, more stimulating, and just a much more exciting environment. And so that's what we're currently working on now. We're broken ground, and we're hoping to have animals, as soon as we're built. And so we are, as I say, we're breaking ground. We have we've identified some animals that we'd like to try to acquire. There's been some real interest in, having some of these animals go into sanctuaries. But right now, there's about 300 dolphins down in Central and South America that need homes, and about 300 in Europe. So these dolphin swim programs have been making a lot of money over the years, and now they're not doing very well. People aren't going to them anymore. They don't have the money to be able to take care of their animals like they used to. And in some cases, these animals are either being returned to the wild with no skills, or they're which will die fairly quickly, or that some of them in some cases actually starve to death. So we're in a really difficult time, and all this I guess what I'm trying to say is that everything I've learned, still got a lot more to learn. And it's we're at a critical time right now with a lot of these populations because they're dwindling really fast, and we're running out of time. That's it.
So I'm sure our audience will have some questions for you. When requests, can you repeat their questions just so the online audience can hear the question?
Yep.
Come on, don't make a liar out of me.
Good.
Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome.
My first question are about hope.
Uh-huh.
Did you say that you gave her fluids?
Yes.
She was there.
Uh-huh.
How did you do that? And is that the first time that's been done?
Yes. In an open water setting, yes. Yeah. And we were able to do it because if you get the corner of the hinge of the mouth, if you get inside of it and sometimes you can pinch that a little bit and they'll open their mouth up. Once you can open their mouth up a little bit, you get your hand in there. And my hands have filled up. I lost some fingernails doing it, but you get your fingernails, your hand in there, lift it up a little bit, get the tube in and slide it down the throat. And just to try to get just some kind of fluids. She'd had her mouth closed for pretty close to a month. So that has just some fresh water and just something that has to be pretty good for her. But she was a really interesting animal, and it was surprising to me how quickly we developed that bond. And I'm sorry, I should have said that question. I will next one.
Did you say that's the first time in a free swimming whale?
Yes, that would have been the first. That was the first time. They've had JJ and GG gray whales that they've done it with, and they've had other SeaWorld has done it with animals that they've brought in that are smaller animals, but to my knowledge, nothing like that's been done with anything that big. And in reality, we got 20 or 30 gallons of water into her at a time, but we probably needed to get closer to 200 or more, but it was something. That was a bit of a spark. And the other thing that was interesting is when we did it, the next time we went out there, she, when we were coming up in the boat, she raised her head out of the water looking for us, like she was anticipating us coming, or maybe coming over to her again. I'm not sure, but it was, the animal side of it was really positive, and the animal side usually is. It's the people side that sometimes is more difficult to navigate. Yeah.
There was a question from one of our online audience members, and they asked, why are the dolphin swim projects failing?
Well, why are the dolphin swim programs failing? It's because people, 10, 15 years ago, the number one thing that people wanted to do on their bucket lists was swim with dolphins. That was a popular thing to do. Everybody wanted to do it. Now it's not even on people's bucket list. And so these facilities, they were popping up all over because they could make a lot of money on these animals. They could charge a lot of money and make a lot of money. So they popped up all over the Caribbean, all over Central America. They had them because there was an easy way for fishermen to go out and catch a dolphin or two and then start a swim program. And there's some really good legitimate ones out there. There's just a few, but they are out there. And those are still doing okay, but people's interest is changing. And that is a problem for these animals when there's so many of them currently housed in captivity that need homes.
You told a story about the killer whales where they wouldn't eat, and you separated it, and then the male started eating fish, and then you brought him back in the same tank, and you gave the male, you put fish in there again, and the female was like, no, don't eat that.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean they're transient?
They were, yeah,
they were?
yeah.
And so transients don't eat fish?
No, no, that's a totally different, food item to them. And it's interesting between the difference between the transient and residents, and some of your audience may know a lot more about this than I do. But some of the latest research is that there's no crossbreeding in over 200,000 years. And so here you have animals that look almost identical, and yet there's no crossover. And so we know that southern residents will take harbor porpoise and play with them and kill them oftentimes, but they won't eat them. And and the transient animals, they won't touch the fish. So it's a very cultural thing, and it's and I think that's what separates these two species, but our subspecies. And that's one thing we didn't know when we were catching these animals. We didn't know that there was transients or offshores and residents, and they were just killer whales that we thought that they were really fluid situation where they go between pods, and that wasn't the case. So
most of what was in captivity was southern resident?
A lot of them, yeah. And that was because the biggest catch was in Oak Harbor over on Whidbey Island, and that's when both J, K, and L were all together when they collected them. They caught J first, and then I think it was J, and they had them in the nets, and then the other two pods came in and they encircled all of them, and so they had all the southern residents.
Wow.
Yeah, and they lost some there, and then they sold a bunch of them, but that was before my time.
Any other questions? Looks like it. So
Okay.
we want to thank you so much for
No problem.
coming out and presenting tonight for us. I have a little gift for you, and hopefully your mic is picking this up. But this is one of our T-shirts.
Oh, nice. Thank
And
you.
it has whales. It has killer whales throughout it.
Oh, yeah.
So the more you look at it, the more you're going to see.
Yeah,
all
the
kinds of
fish
cool
and everything.
stuff
Yeah,
in it.
thank you. Thank you very
Yes,
much.
well, thank you so much for
You're very welcome. Thank you, everybody.
And I want to thank everyone for participating tonight, both our online audience and those in person. I wish you guys all a very nice evening, and I hope some of you guys will join us for some of our future events. So keep an eye out for postings in the near future on that. And thank you all for coming out again and participating.
Thank you, everybody.